More than 500,000 soldiers from across Europe gathered on the outskirts of Leipzig, in Germany in October 1813 for the Battle of Leipzig. This would be a clash of empires that decided the fate of the continent's governance for over 50 years. The Napoleonic Wars were fueled by Napoleon's military might and ambitions to seize control and dominate Europe. He aimed to dominate competition for economic resources, colony and trade route control, and other political factors. Napoleon's campaign was successful at first. He led his army to victories, gaining control of land from Spain to Poland. Even with serious setbacks, including a defeat in the 1805 Battle of Trafalgar by the British, he continued to expand his empire until the pivotal Battle of Leipzig. With his army stretched thin following heavy losses from its 1812 invasion of Russia, Napoleon set out to rebuild his depleted ranks, relying heavily on new, inexperienced recruits as he planned a strike in Germany in 1813. The coalition had around 380,000 troops along with 1,500 guns, consisting of 145,000 Russians, 115,000 Austrians, 90,000 Prussians, and 30,000 Swedes. The French had around 160,000 soldiers along with 700 guns plus 15,000 Poles, 10,000 Italian, and 40,000 Germans belonging to the Confederation of the Rhine, totaling 225,000 troops. The Grand Army, under the command of Napoleon, was in a weakened state. The majority of his troops now consisted of teenagers and inexperienced men conscripted shortly after the near destruction of the Grand Army in Russia. While he won several preliminary battles, his army was being steadily depleted as the Allies, closely following the Trachenberg Plan, systematically defeated his marshals. The French Imperial cavalry was similarly insufficient, making it difficult for Napoleon to keep his eyes on his lines of communications or even scout enemy positions. After a failed attempt to take Berlin, Napoleon was forced to withdraw westward. He crossed the Elba with much of his army between late September and early October and organized his forces around Leipzig. He deployed his army around the city, but concentrated his force from Tacha through Stotteritz, where he placed his command. The Prussians marched to Leipzig from the northeast, the Austrians and Russians from the south, and the Swedish from the northwest. The battle began with a huge artillery bombardment. Russian, Prussian, and Austrian troops advanced across the fields towards the French, who had taken defensive positions in various small villages and fields around Leipzig. To the south of Leipzig, the small village of Wachau that was defended by the French was attacked by Russian infantry. Combat broke out in the streets and fields around this area. The village soon fell into the hands of the Russians. The Russians saw this as an opportunity to pursue the fleeing Frenchmen. French artillery fire made it impossible for the Russians to advance any further. The French then counterattacked. They retook the village in a big bayonet charge. Control of the village would change twice more that morning. Nearby, Markkleeberg was attacked and taken by the Prussians from the Polish fighting for the French. But the French soon sent more troops to this area and the fighting continued. Nearby, under heavy artillery fire, the Austrians assaulted the villages of Dolitz and Canewitz. They managed to take Dolitz, but their attack on Canewitz stalled. On the right flank, the Austrians took the high ground and fought their way into the village of Lebertwalkwitz. Napoleon soon sent more troops to defend this area of the battlefield. The French retook the areas Austria had gained and drove them back. They pursued the Austrians, killing many. The French advance here was halted by the arrival of the Russians.
It's lost, sir. This battle is almost done.
To the west, the Austrians marched to the village of Lindenau to cut off any potential route for Napoleon's retreat. The French sent more troops here to make sure that the road to France was kept open. Northwest of Leipzig, more Prussians and Russians arrived, attacking an area defended by elite French Marines. This was a surprise for Napoleon, who thought the Prussians under the command of Blücher were still a day's march away. Blücher had urged his men on after hearing cannon fire and charged into the attack. He intended to draw French troops towards him to help relieve the Austrian attack from the south. His actions could have possibly saved the entire battle for the coalition. To the south, Schwarzenberg moved more Austrian troops into the fight. Napoleon prepared for an assault. He began a massive bombardment into the Austrian lines. The French advanced on the Austrians. During this advance, one of the largest cavalry charges in the entire Napoleonic Wars occurred. The French smashed through the coalition, almost reaching their leaders. But the French cavalry soon became disorganized and the momentum from the charge had been lost. Fresh Austrian infantry and Russian cavalry from the south arrived and charged at the French. The French were driven back to their original starting position. To the south, the Austrians finally arrived at Markkleeberg, assisting the Russians. The village was finally secured by the coalition. Both armies were tired from fighting. Napoleon sent a message to Emperor Francis I of Austria suggesting an armistice, but the coalition refused. In the north, Russians and Prussians charged the French, taking ground north of Leipzig and pushing the French into a tighter position around Leipzig. At the same time, at another part of the battlefield, Napoleon received 14,000 reinforcements. However, the coalition received more than 100,000 reinforcements from various nations, with all their armies gathering around Leipzig. Napoleon was now outnumbered almost 2-1. He knew he would have to start planning his retreat. Combined, nearly 500,000 troops were now gathered in and around Leipzig. Napoleon saw that the coalition almost surrounded him, so he withdrew his troops into a tighter, more defensive position around Leipzig. He also sent men to the west to secure the army's line of retreat. Fighting began again in the south after the Austrians advanced on the French. General Barclay de Tolly of Russia retook areas to the south that had previously seen high resistance, but Napoleon had moved all of his troops back, closer to the center of Leipzig. The Russians then waited until the Austrians on the right had caught up with them. Once they did, they both attacked the French together and pushed them back further. The Russians and Austrians then both waited for the army of the north to arrive, which was commanded by Crown Prince Bernadotte, who was criticized for his slow advance. The coalition troops had finally reached the northern parts of Leipzig. Russian troops attacked from the north. Their attack failed with heavy losses. The Allied forces marched on Napoleon from all fronts, but he held his ground in his now more defendable position. The Prussians advanced from the south of Leipzig. The French inflicted massive casualties on the Prussians who advanced from the south. At this point, 3,000 Saxons who were fighting for the French surrendered. The situation was grim for Napoleon. By the end of the day, Napoleon's army was outnumbered, exhausted, low on ammunition, and almost surrounded. Napoleon finally gave the order to retreat. The entire French army withdrew into Leipzig and began retreating to the west. The coalition began a bombardment on the city. The coalition began an all-out assault from all directions on Leipzig. The French were overwhelmed and hand-to-hand combat raged on in the streets. French, Polish, Austrian, Prussian, Russian, Swedish, British, and German troops partook in this battle. The majority of the French army were retreating over a bridge out of Leipzig back to France. In order to cut off the pursuing coalition troops, the French decided to blow up the bridge. This trapped 30,000 French troops and 30 generals on the wrong side of the river. The Polish prince died here, and many French troops and generals surrendered. The coalition had defeated the French, but with massive casualties. Over the 4 days of fighting, the coalition army lost at least 52,000 men. Napoleon lost 47,000 men, and a further 35,000 were taken prisoner. Up until this point, this was the costliest European battle in history.